which is, of course, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. So, Metroid Prime. A lot of people, this is kind of a IP that's kind of flown under the radar. If I had to guess, I'm betting most people know about Samus, who's the character there, the main character. Probably know her from like Super Smash Brothers, because that's like a real. Okay, geez, this freaking windscreen is just out of control. Stay. All right, jeez, can't even have a conversation with a computer here. So a lot of people probably know her from Super Smash Brothers. I don't think a lot of people have played the Metroid games. Metroidvania is a genre that's been popularized in recent years. Um, the kind of maze-like game design where you kind of got to backtrack and go to new. As you gain new abilities, you can access new areas and you know explore more of the world. And that really kind of started with the first Metroid game kind of had that, and then there was Super Metroid on Super Nintendo, which I feel like really like created that genre. And that kind of led to Castlevania kind of copying that for a lot of their games. They really like are the ones I think that pushed it the most after Super Metroid, because after Super Metroid there wasn't another Metroid game until I think Metroid Prime. Other than like a couple of the Game Boy games. That's right. There was like Metroid Fusion and stuff like that on Game Boy Advance, which I think came out around the same time as Metroid Prime, if I remember. But after Super Metroid, I think the only appearance Samus had until Metroid Fusion and the first Metroid Prime was on like Super Smash Brothers. And yeah, like she didn't appear in any N64 games or anything like that. But anyways, this, I think I played a little bit of Super Metroid when it was originally on Super Nintendo. I don't know if I ever really got into it, but Metroid Prime was probably the first one that I really played, and it was an incredible game. Definitely a 10 out of 10, like gaming, like coming of age type of experience for me. Where I'll be honest, like I had to buy like the book that told you how to play the like beat the whole game, like how to get through each area, because I was getting stuck like very early in the game, like not really understanding what I needed to do. But I had to buy the book to really like understand. Oh, like this is how you play the game and get through the whole game, and then I'd had to do the same thing for the second one. But um, like I did, like I loved the atmosphere of the game. I loved how in I'm still talking about the first one here. I loved that you're just this lone bounty hunter on this planet exploring and learning about that the culture that was there, and you learn about the species that lived on that planet and what happened to them and why, like there's a reason you're there, and you kind of discover this mystery of what happened, and ultimately have to like take on this great force of evil that is Metroid Prime, which is what they call it. If you don't know much about the Metroid games, the Metroids are basically these like kind of bug parasite things that float around, and they attack creatures and steal their life force and all this stuff. And that's kind of what, for the most part, what all the games are centered around. Like Legend of Zelda, you have Zelda, who's the princess, and a lot of the stories center around her, but you play as Link, or whatever you want to name him. Usually in the games, you can name him whatever you want. But the Metroids generally are the focus of the series. A lot of the plots usually revolve around, the the space pirates trying to take the Metroids and harvest their abilities to take over the universe or whatever. So that's the main story there. And after Metroid Prime, I went back, played Super Metroid, like loved it. Um, you know, uh, I played the original Metroid, but like never really like you know, some of those older games are a little cumbersome to play these days. But I think Super Metroid holds up pretty good, and Metroid Fusion holds up pretty good. But anyways, so I'm trying to focus mostly on the Metroid Prime series here, so I'm just word vomiting to get to hopefully give you context of why I'm going to talk about Metroid Prime 4 the way I am. Sorry. All right, so Metroid Prime was incredible. 10 out of 10 game. Metroid Prime 2 comes out. Again, I had to use the book to get through it, but love that game too. It was a little bit harder. Um, Not for any particular reason. Like I just think it was a little bit harder just in general. But that's not even like a thing. Like if Metroid Prime was a 10 out of 10, it was Metroid Prime 2 was almost a 10 out of 10. It might have been like a 9.5 out of 10. The main things are that I guess what makes it Metroid Prime 2 a little bit less, not necessarily difficult. I didn't find the world as interesting in Metroid Prime 2. I think the thing that made Metroid Prime 2 interesting was like the light and the dark worlds, and there's some cool stuff that they do there. But I think the Metroid Prime 2 bosses are like way more interesting and better than are probably some of the best in the series in general. So Metroid Prime 1 had some great bosses, some really great ones, but 2 I think like really upped that ante. So I want to say, give Prime 2 its flowers or whatever, because it really managed to push the series forward and really like I think that it did something new and interesting and managed to really keep the intensity that the original game had. And then Metroid Prime 3, I did play it. I did again use a guide to beat that game. Metroid Prime 3 was very different from the other ones because instead of being trapped on one planet, you're kind of flying to different planets, and there's like a larger quest that you're a part of. Whereas like I think the isolation that the first two games had was kind of lost in 3 because you're part of this Galactic Federation thing, which always like I feel like they never really like did a great job uh, in the Prime games, like kind of explaining why Samus works with them so much. Like, why isn't she just work for the Galactic Federation? Why is she a bounty hunter? She's always showing up to help the Galactic Federation, but anyways, the point I'm trying to make is you kind of lose a little bit of that atmosphere because there's like a little bit more of like a quest involved in Metroid Prime 3, whereas the first two, you were kind of trapped, and then by the time you get to the point where you can leave, you're like, I can't leave because we got shit to do here. So, anyways, Metroid Prime 3 was probably more like a 7 or an 8 out of 10. Like it was good. There was a lot of fun stuff. That's when they had like the Wii remote controls, and you could aim a little bit better. Like the series was moving forward, but I could tell that they were like, I feel like they were trying to like, I don't know, like make it a little bit more of a mainstream title. But I feel like when they do that, they're kind of losing what really made the Metroid game special. So, anyways, about 6 or 7 years ago now, I think we were all at the point where the idea of Metroid Prime 4 was very much, gone. Like, I don't think anyone was expecting it. And then they announce it. They're like, Metroid Prime 4 is coming. And then, cool. And then we wait a couple years. Nintendo comes back, says, look, we started working on the game, wasn't going great. I think they were originally doing it with Bandai Namco. If I read correctly, I could be wrong about that. But and then they were like, we're going to go back to Retro, who made the first three Prime games. So I was like, yeah, let's go. Another 5 years goes by. Finally, the game comes out. And now here I am to talk about it. So, Metroid Prime 4. How good is it? So, there's a lot of good things in this game, and there's a lot of things in it that feel like they kind of missed the mark. Um, so I'm going to kind of go through it piece by piece to talk about things here. So for me, Metroid Prime is 4 is Beyond is kind of like a 7 out of 10 for me. It's not, it's definitely probably my least favorite of the four games, but it doesn't mean it's a bad game. For one, I just want to say, like, this game plays great. Like, it's functional. There's no bugs. There's not like issues or like balance things. Like, it's a good game. Like, it's a well-made game. But there's just things about it being a Metroid Prime game that I'm holding it to a standard that, it's getting held to a standard. So I'm going to talk about the story first. So the story of this game is that you are you show up to help the Galactic Federation again. So already off the bat, it's like, all right, well, kind of similar to Metroid Prime 3, where I was hoping it would be more like Metroid Prime 1, but show up to help fight the pirates, and then during this battle, you get transported to this other planet. And you're on this planet, and your goal is to get back to, where you were at before. So you don't have access to your ship, so you can't just fly away. It's you're kind of like in a isolated place, which in theory would have been really great, but they decided to have you get transported there with other Galactic Federation people. And I know there was a lot of drama before the game came out because there was one guy in there that was kind of annoying, and he was featured heavily in the demos and stuff, and everyone was like, oh god, no, if this guy's in the whole game, it's going to kind of ruin it. Needless to say, he's not there the whole game, but he's there enough for it to be like, come on, man. Like, but essentially the story is you're there, and I'm going to talk spoilers a little bit here. So if, this is kind of meant for other people that like the Metroid games. I'm not really expecting uh, anyone here to go play it, but, you know, the story is you get transported to this planet, you find out that the planet is basically, you know, the civilization that was there is gone. Um, and they talk about this great tragedy that happens that led to all the inhabitants being like kind of mutated into these creatures. You kind of fight these creatures throughout the game. But anyways, your goal is to get these teleportation keys and get off the planet. Meanwhile, um, you got to go to all these areas, and yeah, you learn about this planet, you learn about the lore and stuff, and eventually you get to the end of the game, and you got to fight this guy Silex, who's like Samus's arch enemy or whatever, um, who has been established like kind of briefly in other games, mostly like the handheld Metroid games. I feel like he's mostly just been teased in other games, whereas like this is like the first game where he's supposed to really like be the villain. But the issue is that they don't really do enough with him here to really make him a compelling villain. So um, you basically fight him a couple times in the game, but then you find out that it's not really him. It's just some robot that's projecting his likeness. And what that does is that just takes away from him as an actual character, because they never really explain that he's on the planet. He just shows up and you fight this fake version of him, and then at the end of the game he pops out of this healing pod and you fight him like for real. So it's like, okay, So he's in this healing pod the whole game, and they're sending these psychic robots. Like, they don't explain like why he's in the healing pod. They don't explain like what his motivations are. Basically, as far as I can tell, like I tried to read a little, I read a little bit of like the wikis to try to figure out about him. As far as I can tell, he just hates Samus, and that's basically his whole story. There's a secret ending you can get where you find out that he was in some platoon. He's fighting the space pirates. Um, Space pirates blow everybody up. Samus shows up, saves the day. Guy hates Samus for some reason, even though she came in and basically saved his bacon. Um, and it's frustrating because I feel like there was a lot of groundwork there where they could have really actually like told a story with this character. To me, he felt like Silex felt like a addition to the game that wasn't like planned. Um, and then the other thing like that I didn't quite get. So they call the game Metroid Prime 4. Metroid. So as I explained, Metroids are these creatures. In the original Metroid Prime game, the final boss is Metroid Prime. It's like this super mutated Metroid. It's this crazy epic battle. It's the lore leading up to it. The environmental storytelling is all great. It all culminates in this fight. At the end of the game, you kill it, but it somehow like it latches onto Samus and kind of steals a part of her suit, which then leads into Metroid Prime 2, where she fights Dark Samus, which is basically Metroid Prime in a Samus suit. Somehow, like, changed itself to become like Samus. So, Metroid Prime is basically still a villain. So, you beat Dark Samus at the end of Metroid Prime 2, not really dead. Comes back in Metroid Prime 3. In Metroid Prime 3, you kind of kill it for good, and then that's that. That was that trilogy. In this game, there's really no ties to Metroid Prime at all, and there's hardly even any Metroids in it. Like, Metroids as an enemy aren't even in the game. What they have is like these Metroids that, Silex can control, but like their main thing is they like fuse with creatures and like kind of enhance them in some ways and give them control over them. But like it's never like established that like he brought these Metroids with him. The Metroids just kind of happen to end up in the main bosses of the game, but there's not like any other regular Metroids in the game. So it's like you go through a level, you get to the final boss, and they're like, here's the crazy final boss. Oh, and it's got a Metroid in it. It's like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. Like they've already leaned into like this great tragedy that happens that kind of led to the downfall of this civilization. And in the original Metroid Prime games, usually a lot of the cataclysmic events centered around a meteor hitting the planet, and the meteor was irradiated with this like you know they called it phazon or whatever. That's usually what kind of leads to the planet falling apart and having all these issues that you have to solve in the games. In this game, there's one log where they mention a meteor, and that was like the only time that I really got excited about the possibility of like where they could go with the game. And then as I played through the game, like it's never mentioned again. They never really do anything with it. They just say, oh, at some point, because of our experimentation, the rain went toxic, and that's what led to everybody, basically either mutating into these creatures or, leaving the planet or whatever. But I feel like they just didn't really nail the story aspects of it. And uh, it's a shame because the other thing, too, is at the end of the game, so you basically, throughout the game, you meet these other uh, Galactic Federation soldiers. And you kind of bond with some of them. Some of them are fun. There's like a robot that's like pretty fun to like go through missions with and stuff. Man. But generally, like, there's nothing like amazing about them. But by the end of the game, you kind of care about them. You're like, all right, like we've been through this journey together, and then at the end of the game, basically they all get left behind because Silex keeps coming back like a cockroach, and basically they all have to team up just to hold Silex back so Samus can escape and leave them all behind. So I don't know what their plan for that going forward is, but I think like generally the consensus is, can we just have Samus out on her own exploring? Like we don't need these other characters. But I imagine if they have an idea of what they're going to do going forward, I'm sure like more of these characters are going to pop up again. But um, anyways, the story, a lot of times the stories in these games are pretty minimal, and you kind of learn. You basically show up after all the crazy stuff has gone down, and you're learning about what happened after the fact, and then you're kind of cleaning up the whole mess that was created. So same similar thing here, but I just feel like there was a lot of story elements that didn't really get paid off at all in this game, and um, like there's a lot of things I was just like, all right, like I guess I'll just accept that this is happening, but it didn't really like land for me. So that was probably one of the weaker elements for me. I'm going to talk later about my theories and stuff, like maybe ways that they could have approached it that may have alleviated a lot of these issues. But for now on, I'm gonna talk about a couple other things. But so the gameplay is really solid. Um, it's your standard Metroid Prime gameplay. There is a few like rail shooter type things where you kind of have to escort the Galactic Federation people around, and they can take damage. If they take damage, take too much damage, they get knocked down. You got to use your abilities to heal them, basically, which is like another thing. It's like, all right, cool. I guess you can just magically heal other people, but you can't heal yourself. But all right, whatever. But like I said, some of them are more fun than others. But generally, um, the gameplay is really fun, and like your standard exploration, and you got the scan visor, which to me was one of the best things about the Metro Prime games, was being able to scan the environment and just really appreciate the attention to detail of the design of the game. But like I said, it's not quite. I feel like the lore in this game isn't quite as in depth as maybe some of the other ones, but um, the overall like feeling that I was hoping for was there when it came to that. The there's also a new addition to this game, which is like the motorcycle. They call it Viola, and I generally so the actual gameplay of riding the bike was done really well. There's some cool environments where you get to ride on. There's like a big desert you can ride through, which is pretty cool. Like it's not an environment that would be interesting like on foot, I think. And you could in theory walk across it, but it would take you forever. But it's big desert. I'd say the most annoying part was I felt like there was just like a little bit too much. Like, part of the thing with these games is collecting all of the upgrades and, different things you can collect in the game to get 100%. And I felt like there was just a little bit too much of that in this game with the bike. Like, I would have appreciated more sections where the bike was like shown, you got to see how useful the bike was, but I feel like they didn't have like a great way to utilize it that really that really like made it worthwhile. There's a couple boss fights that are kind of centered around it, and one of them was cool in a spectacle way, but the other one was just kind of tedious, so it didn't really do much for me. So I would say that was probably definitely the weakest part of the game was Not necessarily the controlling of the bike or the riding the bike around, just the way it was implemented just didn't really scratch that itch for me. The other thing too is just kind of like the interconnectivity of the world. Like in the first two games, and I'm going to get into like the environments here too, which to me are like a big part of these games. But actually, I'll just get into it now. So in a lot of the other Metroid Prime games, and that includes like Super Metroid and a lot of other Metroidvania type games, the world is kind of interlinked, and as you explore more, you kind of unlock new pathways, and it kind of gives you the ability to take different routes to get to where you want to go. If you know you got to go back and get this upgrade, you can take different paths and you unlock them as you go through the game. And then in Metroid Prime 3, they added they still had these different worlds that were kind of connected, but instead of because they're on these different planets, instead of linking them together, you can just fly from your ship from one landing site to another, or from one planet to another planet. And it kind of gave that same thing of being able to like route your paths and stuff, but it wasn't as fun as discovering like a new pathway that led to like another part of a level that you hadn't been to yet. So with this game, there's not really any of that. There's just these different biomes. You got like your forest biome, you've got this lightning biome, you got a snow biome, you got a volcano, and there's like the mines. And then you have this desert that connects them. But if you want to go from one biome to another, you got to drive across. You have to drive across the desert, and there's not enough interesting things happening in the desert. Like you just kind of have enemies that pop up from time to time, and like a lot of the things you can get in the desert, you can't really do much until you have like most of the later game upgrades. So it's like you'll go into a shrine or whatever. They have shrines kind of like in Legend of Zelda. And you might be able to get past the first thing, and then you go inside, and you might be able to pick up like one upgrade. But then you got to come back later when you get another thing to get the last thing in the shrine. And it's just a lot of that like type of I guess I'll have to come back here later type of thing, and just kind of makes it more tedious than fun. Whereas like in the original game, because it was so interconnected, you might just be like on your way to something and be like, oh yeah, like I remember there's a thing in the wall here, and now I have these abilities. You can just blast it open. Whereas like in this game, it's like, all right, now I gotta drive all the way around the desert again, and there's not like great markers that tell you like, all right, like you went into this place and you couldn't get anything, so you kind of have to go from temple to temple and go down. Oh yeah, I don't have this ability yet. I got to come back, and then it just kind of became very tedious there. But aside from that, the design of the game is really well done. Even though the desert is kind of barren and open, it still looks great. Um, the There's a like I want to I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of like a rainy, futuristic, lightning-based area where there's these towers and you can ride the bike between them, which is like one of the few times it feels like it's cool to have the bike. But it's like a very short-lived kind of experience, and but the levels themselves, they're like these towers that you go up and down, and they're like building these other, there's basically like a factory for these bicycles that you are riding around. But the design of it and the feel of it and the music, it all just like really comes together there. And then there's the snow area, which you kind of go into, and it's like a base that's in the snowy mountain, and what's like a research facility. And as you're like going down, the power's out. You're kind of like trying to figure out ways to get through the base without power. But then when you like power up the generator, and like it's like a puzzle to get it going. When it kicks on and the bass lights up, the music changes. It was like it like gave me chills. It was like such a well done thing, well done moment in the game that I had to, I just really want to call it out, and that was really well done. Uh, there's like a lava area. There's the forest area. In a lot of ways, the environments felt like a retread of the original Metroid Prime, which had a lot of the same types of areas. Um, but like to me, in that game, it felt more well done because it felt like the world was so interconnected and realized in that way that like it made it more fun to go through those areas. But in this game, you kind of go to an area, you kind of learn what was going on there, and then you maybe come back for a little bit to grab something, but you're usually not in there very long. But you know, after you usually don't go back for very long after you've completed the area. But overall, like the game looked great. The graphics were really well done. And then I mentioned the music a couple times. I forgot to put it on my list here, but I mentioned the music a couple times, and the music for the Metroid Prime games have always been a highlight for me, particularly in one and two. I felt like in three, it there was it didn't quite have the same level of impact on me as the first two games did. But in this game, it felt like a really good return to form. Like like I said, there's different biomes. The music really fit those biomes. Uh, it felt like a good continuation of the Prime series. Like if I was ranking the soundtracks, four would definitely be above three, but I don't know if it would. It definitely wouldn't be above one or two. Um, but yeah, like I said, there's that moment where you turn that generator on and the music like picks up and the whole vibe changes and it really just like kind of gets you pumped up to go back through the area again because you got to go deep into the base to turn on the generator, and now you got to come back through the base with the power on, and now all these creatures are out and you got to fight them, and it definitely like pumps up the vibe. And then the like music in the factory area is awesome. The music in the forest area really brought me back to like Metroid Prime 1. Um, so I just got to shout out the music because I felt like they did a pretty good job with it. Boss music is also like a pretty big thing. Like in a lot of the Prime games, each boss has their own theme, and in particular, the first two games, the boss music was epic. In this game, I didn't notice it as much, um, but uh, overall, I'd say the soundtrack for this was really solid. It's one of like the few gaming soundtracks that I'll just go back to from time to time and listen to because it just gives me the vibes. All right, the next thing is the bosses because that's a big part of these games, particularly the Prime games. Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3, like all the like main bosses in that game were like usually like these huge, massive, like it felt like you were fighting like a real force of nature. In this game, I don't want to say the bosses weren't intimidating, but to me they felt like the kind of scale like if you were playing like a 2D Metroid game where like you were fighting a creature that was bigger than you but not like massive. Like there's only really one boss in this game that has that scale, and then you kind of fight him on the bike half the time, so it doesn't really like hit the same way. Whereas a lot of those first Prime games, like you were fighting all these giant bosses and you were just kind of on foot. Sometimes you'd have environmental hazards around you that limited your movement. But in this game, like they really feel like that was something I really missed, was just feeling like you were facing these larger than life creatures. Most of like the main area bosses felt like mini bosses from like the first two games. So that said, like design wise, like they were fun enough. There was one that's in like the factory area that really just kind of reminded me of a boss from Metroid Prime 3. Um, and the final boss didn't really do it for me. It really kind of bummed me out because, um, sorry, just got to change my seating here. Um, the final boss just kind of, it's Silex. Didn't really hit because I felt like, with the other games, the lore always kind of built up to the final boss. Like, you would be kind of reading about all this stuff, studies and things that happen that kind of explain why this final boss is such a big deal. But in this game, like, the final boss is like never mentioned. He shows up at the start of the game. You fight a couple fake versions of him in the game, and then he shows up at the end of the game, and he's just like, I don't like Samus. And then on top of all that, you have to do like the first half of the boss fight with all these other Galactic Federation people around you, and they can get knocked down, and you gotta like stop fighting the boss to get them back up, and it was really just kind of added a level of frustration to it. Like, I already like wasn't like super like locked in with the boss, but that to me just felt like that's just another one of those things where I felt like I couldn't tell if maybe they were forced to include this boss for this guy in the game for some reason, or if that's the way it felt. He felt very tacked on. It felt like he was added in without much thought of how he would play into the story. But again, I'm going to get into like some theories and some ideas that I think could have made all of that work. Because it's like I don't want to sit here and be like, that was dumb, that was dumb, that was dumb, and not like have an idea of what they could have did to. I'm not trying to tell them what they need to do something different, but I'm just saying, like, if they had just did some of these things, it would have made more sense with the game that was made. But anyways, um, you know, overall, the final boss was, especially like the second half of the fight when you're in like this, you kind of get taken into this other realm, which again is like, I know we're in sci-fi land, but it just felt like a little bit over the top. Like, is this something this guy can just do whenever he wants? Can he just fly into another realm? That's where like there's a lot of frustration there that I feel like isn't really explained, or like, you know like, what am I just supposed to believe that this guy can do what all this stuff? Anyways, the fight itself was pretty well done, especially for it just being like a kind of man-to-man fight. Like, it's just another guy basically in a suit. It felt more engaging than I was expecting it to be. But anyways, you beat his ass. He falls into the wormhole, and then you think like everything's copacetic. You're finally about to teleport home. Then he pops back out of another wormhole. All of your team that you have been putting up with the whole game to save, they all sacrifice themselves. Not like, you don't really see them die, but they all like are holding the guy down while you basically just have to leave because you're the only one. You're the only one that can operate the thing to get you out of there. So it just kind of felt like what was the point of all that? So, anyways, I'm not saying like Samus wouldn't help people, but it was just like, why? Like, it's not like these people were like her best friends or whatever. Like, I think over the course of the game you get more attached to them, but it's just like, the whole thing is she's supposed to be like a lone wolf, and then it's like, all right, she's really kind of like working with these people here. In a lot of ways, you're dependent on them because they kind of give you some of the upgrades and stuff in the game, but overall, like, I was just like, all right, so we're kind of ending on a low note here because all your people get left behind. There's no like understanding or like effort made. Like, are we going to try to go back and save them? There's just a lot of things that are left open ended there. And so um, basically that brings me to kind of like where this plays in the overall story of Metroid, because the Metroid Prime game. Well, there's some people who say the Metroid Prime games aren't considered part of the continuity. I don't know about all that. To me, it seems like they take place between I guess the first, I guess Metroid and Super Metroid, and then like pretty much any other game after the Prime series is like after this. So like Metroid Fusion, Metroid Dread, those are all after this game, or after the Prime series, I guess you would say. But basically, the thing that kind of throws me is just like what was the point? The whole thing feels like this isolated incident that um, doesn't really like build on the story of the characters at all. Like I feel like particularly the first two Prime games, even though you kind of get trapped on this planet, and yes, it's an isolated incident, it feels like even without Samus talking, which is like a pretty standard thing, Samus doesn't really talk in the games at all. But you kind of feel like this journey of like, I came here to do this mission. The mission went south. Um, I had the chance to leave, but I feel like I got to solve this issue. And you feel like this growth of Samus and yourself, like by going through this mission. And then like Prime 3 was kind of like the culmination of the first two games. Like you're really like fighting to stop this thing from happening to anybody else. This radiation and stuff. This radiation and stuff from spreading. Um, and then this game, it's like, all right, you go to this planet. Yeah, there was a tragedy on this planet, but it doesn't tie into like anything else in the series. Like they don't make an effort to do it. I felt like maybe there was a time where they were trying to do that, but I guess because of the way Metroid Prime 3 ends, which is basically they go to the planet where all the meteors come from, the radiation stuff. They destroy the planet, and in theory, that erases the radiation from the universe, which doesn't make entire sense. You would think if like a meteor crashed on a planet and it had this radiation stuff on it, it would be there no matter what. But maybe they're trying to get away from that, which is fine. But I felt like the most excited I got in this game was when I thought maybe they were gonna tie it back into the original game somehow. Um, so that kind of leads me into some of the ideas I think they could have did to actually do that, to kind of tie it back into the original game. So to me, the weakest parts of this game are just kind of like the way the story ties into the Prime series in particular, and the and like the fact that I feel like aside from it kind of being like, I don't want to say a cliffhanger because it's not like something crazy happens other than these characters getting left behind. Like you kind of did all you could do on this planet. It's not like you're leaving the Silex doesn't care about the planet. It's not like Silex is going to blow up the planet because you left. He may kill those people, or maybe because you left, he'll just be like, all right, I'm out of here. I'm just going to wormhole out of here. Seems like he really only cares about killing Samus, which is never explained. But I feel like, and they do this whole cinematic at the end of the game where they're like, here's why Silex hates Samus. And I watch it and I was like, I don't really understand why he hates her. Like, he's in a battle with the space pirates. The space pirates blow up all his army or whatever, like his troops. And then Samus drops in and blows the thing up. And then when Samus tries to go be like, help him up, he's like, no, I hate you. And that's their story. Now, what could have worked is if they flashed back to like Prime 2 and Prime 3, where they like In Prime 2, there's like a Galactic Federation team that basically gets wiped out on this planet. And and then there's Prime 3 where you're kind of working directly with the Galactic Federation. But I don't even know if they had to flash back to those games, but there could have been some type of lore spread throughout the game because there's like a Galactic Federation base that gets transported to the desert too, and I feel like they never really like dive into that as much. But they could have tried to like tie in that like maybe he had like all these friends and they were like, blood brothers and stuff, and but then they go to these planets that Samus went to and they all die. And you kind of like build up this lore that explains why he hates her in particular. And you could even go back as far as like, okay, hey, maybe there was like a team that went to ZB's and then ZB's blows up and those people were never like, there's a lot of things they could have did with that game. With like featuring the previous lore and tying it into his character in particular. The other thing they could have did, which to me like feels like the thing that like what I thought about when I saw Metroid Prime 4 is I was like, dude, like how are they gonna bring back Metroid Prime? Because to me, like that's one of the most highlights of my gaming experiences. Getting to Metroid Prime and fighting it, and like that boss was awesome. And there's things that they do in this game that feel like callbacks to Metroid Prime, but they never dive into it. Like one of the things with Metroid Prime in the original game was um, that it could like change its elemental status. Like it would be yellow, which matched your power beam, which meant only your power beam could hurt it. And then it would switch to red, which was like the fire. It would use fire attacks, but your fire attacks could hurt it. Only your fire attacks could hurt it. And then, but so that was like a really cool mechanic in that fight, and it made you use all the tools in your toolbox to beat Metroid Prime. Well, in this game, they do that, but it's just like it doesn't explain like there's no explanation as to why he has the elemental abilities. Like, in Metroid Prime, like they show that like this creature was like an experiment, and they took they took things from it to create other enemies in the game that have the same elemental weaknesses. In this game, they don't do any of that. They're just like, oh, he's going to turn to a fire version, and now you got to use fire attacks to kill him. Like they were like taking those elements and utilizing it, but they never explain. Like it's not like Silex is running around throughout the game, thwarting you and grabbing the same power upgrades you are. As far as I could tell, he's in a healing tank the entire game, and there's no reason like that he would have any additional abilities that he uses at the end of the game. So, um, so he does all that. So, anyways, what I was getting at was, from what I read about Silex, he stole this experimental armor from the Galactic Federation, and he, got like all these abilities, and he got this suit, and he got this ship or whatever. Whatever, I don't care about the ship. He's got like his own morph ball form, which is, whatever. But, they're just like, yeah, he stole an experimental suit, and this experimental suit has all these abilities for some reason. They never explain it. But maybe if they tied it in, they were like, well, this experimental suit was made from the carcass of Metroid Prime. That would explain everything. Like, it would be like, we went to Talon 4, I think, which is the game in Metroid Prime. We went there to investigate that incident. We found the body of Metroid Prime. We experimented on it. We made this suit. Silex stole it. Boom. Tied in the Metroid Prime series. Like, it could have been one log entry. It could have been a couple log entries. Whatever. It would have been really simple. Would have explained um, why he has all these abilities. There's just a lot of that could have been done there. And then again, like I felt like the lack of Metroids in the game in general just kind of took away from the feeling of it being a Metroid game. Um, so I was going to get into like theories. I mean, my theory is basically what I feel like they should have did in this game. The things that I was saying before, like I think they're going to try to like retroactively tie Silex into the other games, but um, more or less, like I'm hoping that with Metroid Prime 5, which I'm hoping is coming, I think I heard this game sold pretty well, and I think that there's something to do there if you if you if they like have an idea. Um, I don't really know. Like I said, I know that they kind of started this game at one company and then moved it over and kept working on it. I don't know if they were trying to like use the assets of the original version and build upon it, or if they literally started from scratch. But to me, this felt like just kind of like a subpar entry. Like, I'm hoping that I think it could be a good entryway for people that weren't fans before, and I hope that they'll go back and play the Metroid Prime remaster. Ooh, I felt like that is one of the best things we've gotten in the last few years. I'm hoping we'll get Metroid Prime 2 remaster, Metroid Prime 3 remaster. It's a great series. Um, Man, I really rambled about this. I thought maybe I was going to talk for like 10 minutes about this game, but I really had a lot to say. And I know that I really harped on a lot of things, and that's really just because I felt like the attention to detail in the original games was so well done, particularly 1 and 2. I don't remember as much about 3 because I kind of just sped through it once or twice. Um, like it just didn't stick with me as much as the first two, but this one really felt like there was a lot of things that brought me back, but it didn't quite land in terms of like the grand scheme of Metroid games. Um, to me, Metroid Dread was a far superior game in terms of story, gameplay, lore, all that stuff. Like I felt like they really nailed a lot there. But overall, if you're thinking about getting into a game like this and you like the idea of exploring a planet and learning about it, I think the Prime series is a good place to start. And yeah, man, I really can't think of what else to say. I'll probably get off of here and think of like two or three other points that I had, but I mean, I think the main thing that really kind of underdelivered was, I guess, what you would call the main villain of the game. Um, the first game you had Ridley, which was like, kind of like the typical Samus villain. He's been in like most of the other games. The space pirates in general were the villains, and again, like the space pirates were there with Silex in the beginning of the game. None of them got transported to the planet. Like there was just a lot of elements of that like just didn't like really line up for me, and like I felt like they could have dove more into that, and in turn made all those story elements that I was kind of harping on like make more sense. But yeah, the rest of the Prime games had Dark Samus, which was like a main villain, but I feel like in terms of main villains, Silex has been like the weakest of them all. So hopefully they'll turn that around and you know kind of take this series to new heights. I think the Metroid series is a very unique IP. I think they could do a lot of cool stuff with it. I thought some ideas that like I thought it might have been cool if they did like the I forget what they call it, but it's like an ability in the 2D games in particular where you run really fast and you can like zip through these areas, and a lot of times you use it to like run through fake walls and um, kind of like find hidden pathways and stuff. I thought that might have been a cool way of traversing like different areas. You know, instead of like taking elevators, you could have just been like, all right, you're gonna whoop, like zip to another area. But you know, again, I'm just that's more like that would have been cool. That's a cool idea I have. That doesn't necessarily mean it would have worked in this game, but yeah, man, I really rambled there.